Fascinating interview, an exclusive in the Wall Street Journal. Online, right now you can read it at WSJ.com. Interview with ECB President, that's the European Central Bank President, Mario Draghi, just took office a few months ago, by Brian Blackstone, our own Wall Street Journal correspondent in Europe. Brian joins us right now. Brian, terrific interview with Draghi. First of all, putting aside the actual words, what was the tone that you say that Mario Draghi adopted in talking to you about the European crisis?
Well, it was one of kind of this is the first interview that he did since the Greece deal was announced on Tuesday. This huge 130 billion euro bailout, and basically he was cautious about it. I think if there's any lesson from Greece over the last 2 years, it's you have to see their promises implemented into law and then actually done in the economy. And so he talked about all of the serious commitments that Greece has made, but he did talk about risks of how do these things get implemented. And so he was very optimistic on other aspects of the crisis.
Right.
Better fiscal rules in Europe. He sees some better signs in the economy, in the banking system. But it's very clear that Greece is still on their minds, even within 2 days of this
right.
130
now,
billion
Brian,
euro bailout.
I read the interview again, which I urge you readers to have a look at as well. But here are my takeaways from it. First of all, my sense was here was a guy who showed that he, quote unquote, really did get it when it came to what the nature of the problem was. He made a comment in the course of the interview that he thought the welfare state, or I forget exact words, but the welfare state as it had existed was over, recognizing that the problems were so deep-seated in Europe that something dramatic had to happen, and that answer was in part austerity. So here was a guy who got it, who understood the nature of the problem, and in fact, my takeaway was he's kind of done everything more or less right since taking office. What was your take of the interview?
Well, I thought that point he made about the social model was an interesting one too, because basically what he was really referring to was, and you see this in countries, especially in Southern Europe, like Spain, where you have youth unemployment rates up around 50%. And so what he was talking about is, you've got a protected part of the labor force, and then all the flexibility in the labor force is taking part in basically the youth age population. So you're getting these really high unemployment rates. And he's saying that that model just doesn't work anymore, and that they have to focus on trying to create employment in other sectors besides kind of the protected sectors. The problem is getting from austerity and economic reform to a point where you have these competitive countries that create these jobs, and that's still the trick for Europe. The austerity might help get their deficits in line, but it's having a crushing effect on their economies. Economic reform is going to help. Making labor markets more flexible is going to help. But they still need to kind of bridge that gap and sustain their economies until some of these efforts really start to bear fruit.
Yeah, my takeaway again was that he understands the deep-seated nature of the problems in Europe, in particular this issue of vested interests. And as we saw in the case of Greece and in many of the other European countries, same problem here in the U.S. You have vested interests who are really not receptive to the kind of change that is required, like labor market reform, to make the European economy hum. Did you get the sense from Mario Draghi that he's very confident and comfortable in his new role as ECB president?
He does seem to be. He was at the Bank of Italy for 6 years before joining the ECB. So he's not a newcomer to the ECB, because the national central bank presidents in the Eurozone are also voting members of the ECB. So it's kind of like moving from the Dallas Fed to the Federal Reserve. But still, he has a different kind of style than his predecessor, Jean-Claude Trichet. He has a different kind of communication style. He seems very comfortable with the steps that he has taken since taking office 4 months ago. In particular, this decision to pump almost 500 billion euros worth of 3-year loans into the banking system. So he seems very comfortable with the steps that the ECB has taken, and he's really trying to shift the emphasis now to what the governments can do on this economic reform question, which he's really pounding on now.
Right. Any other thoughts on the interview? Overall, I got a sense of a guy who actually knows what he's doing. Was that your takeaway, Brian?
Well, yeah, the one point that he's had to defend himself on in the last few days is this decision by the ECB to basically exclude the bonds, the Greek bonds that it holds, from any type of haircuts that are going to be hit for other bondholders. They did a swap with Greece that basically the ECB got new bonds that won't be subjected to any kind of haircuts. His response was, the ECB's money is basically the people's money. It's the taxpayers' money, and he kind of in a pretty nifty way kind of took what he's been criticized for and turned it into kind of a defense of the taxpayer.
Right.
So he definitely has a good way of explaining himself.
Right.